Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Last Seen Alive. For those of you who have gone on and possibly seen like a Ryan Reynolds movie called The Captive, or you've probably seen the Hugh Jackman movie called The Prisoners, or Prisoner, or you had gone on and possibly seen the Kurt Russell movie Breakdown, really Last Seen Alive is to be another abduction movie where it seems we have both Gerard Butler and Jamie Alexander, who is actually been known to be in uh, Thor as Sith, or to eventually also go on, and I think she was in the show Blind Spot, I think, the one where she's all tattooed. So we have Gerard Butler playing Will in this movie, and Jamie, who is playing Lisa in this film. And we go on and have them go to a gas station, and all of a sudden Lisa is to be talking with a man that is to just make her disappear. And so Will is now going and taking 20 minutes to go through this gas station, go through every part around this gas station, and is to try to see if Lisa is anywhere in this gas station, to the point of him realizing, like, okay, where is my wife? To the point of him having to go on and check all these bathrooms and everything like that. So Will then goes on and then is to eventually be so afraid of the fact that his wife is nowhere near this gas station that he ends up immediately calling the police. Going on and, of course, telling him it's like, I don't know what happened with my wife, but she's not here. I've spent quite a bit of time, and like there's so many truckers and there's so many people within this gas station that like anything could possibly have happened. So we have it to where it seems that in the very beginning of this movie, we're already told what is to happen with Lisa. And so we're having to take the rest of the movie just naturally assuming that like whatever they're doing is just going to be a waste throughout this film. And so like that is the one big mistake of this movie. But not only that, we go throughout this film and thinking that we're getting these little pieces and little chunks of something that's really going to have some big reveal at the end of this, or we're going to eventually find out that maybe Will did go on and abduct his own wife, because it seems that Lisa is to finally want to separate and be away from Will. And and at the end of this movie, we go on to have this mainly just be a search film where it seems that Will is stumbling upon things a lot quicker than this detective Paterson, who of course is to be played by Russell Hornsby. Honestly, with Russell, like I've seen him in the show Grimm, and I'm like, so like, really, like if people are to just want to go on and just have fun being in a detective role, then I guess it is what it is. But yeah, like whatever it is to just keep on working. So we going into this movie, and like really, for the most part, that's what kind of happens in this film. Leaving it very vague, of course, to go into a little bit more spoilers. But yeah, really that's what this is, as much as a nutshell of a film. So really, is this movie worth $20 right now? Considering it's premium access, I'll give you a free option to be able to see this movie regardless, so you don't have to weigh the pros and cons of that. But it's only an hour and a half film. I would not go on and say that this honestly is worth $20. If it went on to a much cheaper price, like if it was like $5.99 or $4.99 or whatever, like when it gets eventually like way cheaper, then you could probably go on and say like, hey, it's only X number. Like that seems like a good deal. like let's go and buy into that. But yeah, like I would just say that save your money, go and get this free option that I'll eventually give to you. So when I would normally go through premium access stuff, a lot of times I will have a convenient number of apps to be able to see things for absolutely free. You can go into any new release movies and see other app options and stuff like that that I will eventually give through those reviews. But for this one specifically, there's a certain app that only has like the premium access version, while all the others are like these bootleg theater versions that you can see for absolutely free. So I'll give you this one. So you can go into a Google Play Store and search the words TV Crush, that's 2 words, and be able to find an app where the logo says HD Movies with a crown onto the side. Be able to download that app and dare in fact be able to see Last Seen Alive for absolutely free with ads or with commercials and whatever. Um, but yeah, but you'll be able to see the movie for absolutely free. And you can make your own clear consensus of whether this movie is to eventually be good, bad, or just meh, just one of those. So the grading of this movie, I would just have to say that it's an okay film. It's another one of those search movies that like really is to eventually tell us at the very end what is to really have happened with Lisa. Because we are told a thing, but then that person that we're being told something, we can't really trust. And so, like, we can't take anybody for their word. We don't know what the heck is going on until the very end of this movie. Because anything anybody's to say, do not trust them, especially unless it's coming out of possibly Will's mouth, maybe, or possibly Detective Patterson's mouth, or possibly Lisa's parents, because it seems like they're always telling people the truth. So, throughout this movie. So, with that said, like this movie is just one of these. It's okay. Uh, very uh just a very bland movie because normally I would probably pass on like an abduction film, but I've seen them. But they're always just very like they're very just dry films, or they're just very like just films that just are a eater of time. Um, I liked the mystery of this movie. Like that's what kind of kept me intrigued. But I was like, thank goodness that this movie is only an hour and a half. Man, if I were to have gone on into like 2 hours and change in this movie, and it was a missing movie, I would have been like, no. I would have been like, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to watch this whole film because it'll be so like not worth that time. But luckily, it was only an hour and a half. So, anyways, yeah, let's just go into spoilers. I've kind of already teed it up and going into little chunks of this film. Uh, let's go into the full bite of it all. Let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers because technically, I've already said some things that were to happen in this film, but not like the end result of the film. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So we go on to this road trip right after we are to get a scene between Detective Peterson and a guy named Knuckles. Because did somebody just watch Sonic 2? I'm sure they probably did. Detective Patterson is going on and talking with a guy named Knuckles, and so we are basically told that Lisa is dead. Like her body was buried and she's dead. And I'm like, wow, that's a great way to open up a film, like with us immediately assuming that at some point Lisa's going to be dead. And what is the point of this film? And like this detective is wanting like Knuckles to confess everything, like he'll feel really good after, and he's choking him, and I'm like, is this police procedure? So we go on, and so we have both Will and we have Lisa that are on the road, and so Will is mentioning to Lisa, it's like, well, hey, like, it was good that you went on and you told me about that guy that like had like the affair with, because at least you're just kind of being honest about things, and so Lisa is to eventually be uh kind of consistently getting these texts and these emails, I guess, from a guy named Clint. And eventually, once Will and Lisa are to stop by this gas station, because Will is to mention, it's like, well, yeah, I understand that, like, we're 15 minutes away from your parents' house, but I'm really running low on gas. And so Lisa's like, seriously? And Will's like, well, yeah, unless you want to push the car. And Lisa's like, like, no. And Will's like, okay, well, then let's stop at gas. So Will and Lisa, so Lisa's to go into this gas station and get some water and possibly go to the bathroom. So Will then goes on and is to eventually just kind of pump for gas, and then he's eventually just kind of like, okay, where is Lisa? It's been a while. It's been a while. So Lisa all of a sudden is to be checking her phone, and she's getting these texts from Clint saying like, hey, like, have you been like receiving my calls? Like, have you been getting my emails? Is he gonna write her a letter at some point? And so Lisa is to, of course, want to take a break from Will, as she is to explain this to him. And, like, Will is telling Lisa, it's like, well, hey, like, seriously? Like, is it because you're depressed? Uh, is there, like, just something, uh, going on? Like, what is it? Like, and so Will is to just be like upset, of course, and Lisa's like, "Oh, so like if I go on and have these kind of feelings, like, are you always gonna act like this?" And like, I get that Will can be upset, but like, you also probably have to be like understanding too, just like, hey, like whatever you feel, like go on and just like do you, like if that's what you need. But so Will is just upset with Lisa because he's worried that this is going to lead into a divorce, and and eventually they're going to go their separate ways, and Will's just like, look at all the stuff that we've done together, like look at all of this, like look at all we've accomplished, and you want to just kind of throw this all away, like. So we have it to where Will like really wants to work on their relationship, and like trying to just kind of work this out. But Lisa's just like, well, no, I just need a break. I just need time. And Will's like, okay. So Will takes Lisa to her parents at Emerson's. And so that's when they are stopping for gas. And so Lisa is to, supposedly we see later in footage, that Lisa is to see some random friend of hers, and so she ends up talking to him, and that talk ends up leading to a truck being lined perfectly within this camera, and then all of a sudden Lisa is to disappear with this man. So we go on and we have Will that is eventually going into the gas station, is kind of looking around for Lisa. He's consistently asking a number of people like, hey, did you see like black haired girl, white shirt, jeans, like, have you seen this girl? Everybody's like, no. So we have it to where Will is asking Oscar, the guy behind the counter, like, hey, did you see this woman? And Oscar's like, no. So we go on and we finally have Will, who's looking all over the gas station, looking and asking anybody, like, hey, it's Lisa, did you see this girl? So on and so forth, shouting out for Lisa at some points. And so going into the bathrooms, seeing if anyone's there. So Will is just going on like, okay, like, I spent like 20 minutes looking for my wife. Like, this should not be that hard. And so Will finally asks Oscar, it's like, hey, do you have any like local police that I can just kind of call? And Oscar is just like, well, just call 911. And Will's like, oh, okay, I'll just do that then. So Will is to go on and call the police and file a missing persons report, and that leads to Detective Patterson. So, or Paterson, like the way it's like spelled in this, I want to say Paterson, but it's probably more. It probably more sounds like Peterson. But anyways, so we have Will who calls this detective, and so the detective is saying like, well, like supposedly he says that he's not going to go there personally, that there might be some other police officer that that might go to this gas station, so just kind of go and kind of wait for someone to show up. So Will goes on and drives to Barry and uh, Barry and Anna's home, and is to ask them, it's like, well, hey, like, is Lisa here? And both of Lisa's parents are going on and saying, like, no, I thought you were supposed to bring her. And Will's like, yeah, I get that, but like, she's not with me. I kind of thought that maybe there was some way that she just so happened to come here. She met a friend here, and she, like, both of them just kind of drove to this place. Like, I don't know, I'm just grasping at straws. And so both the parents are like, well, what are you talking about? How is it you don't have her? And Will's like, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure things out. And so for most of this movie, Gerard Butler acts very confused throughout this whole entire film. I've never seen Gerard Butler look so confused in a film. It's kind of like Mark Wahlberg through the entire movie of The Happening, where it's like, wait a minute, what? Hold on, guys. Wait, what? It's kind of like both of the Mark Wahlberg Happening and like the Gerard Butler Last Seen Alive. They're acting somewhat the same through most of this film, with the exclusion of Gerard Butler going into his own investigational work. The interesting thing we had in the trailer is, because I watched the trailer also, Gerard Butler was going on and saying that like he's the average guy, like he isn't a detective, he's not this guy, he's not that guy, but hey, if you take my wife, and I'm like, where was the line of like that movie or the trailer being put into the movie? Like, I think that would have really sold within the film. Um but I guess like for the trailer, it was just to set up that like Will's just this common guy, even though he's beating the out of people. He's just a common guy, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like he's not this like CIA special ops guy or private investigator that's a cop who's going to deal some rough justice because his wife is missing. It's just he's going to do this on his own, and he's just the normal common guy. Anyways, pushing on. So Will, Will is to eventually go on and make his way back to this gas station, and it seems like Will is to be a real estate guy, and so Will is to have experience with cameras, and so the detective is going to the gas station and asking Oscar, it's like, well, hey, do these cameras work? And Oscar is telling him no. And so the detective is like, okay, like, Will, like since the detective had shown up personally himself to deal with this missing persons case, because I guess there was no one else to send. The detective was to eventually tell Will, it's like, well, hey, just kind of just stick around, because like Will at some point was to drive off and go to Lisa's parents' home, and eventually that kind of went the way it did. And so Will drove back to the gas station because Will was saying, it's like, well, hey, the detective is probably going to this gas station and I'm probably not there. So Will gets to this gas station, and so the detective is to take Lisa's purse and is to also go on and ask Oscar for this camera feed, and Oscar says that it's broken. So eventually we go on and we have Will who's looking at these cameras and realizing that they are working and they should be working. So Will goes on and then is to grab Oscar and is to force him to give up the camera feed because he knows that these cameras are working. And so Oscar is forced to give him this laptop or this little device. So we have Will go straight to the detective's office uh, with this item, and so Will is telling him like, "Hey, here's the feed. You can go and watch this video." And the detective's like, "Well, I thought that machine was broken." And Will's like, "Well, I thought that too, but it's working fine." So the detective and Will are watching this camera feed, and they're kind of figuring out the perfect time to backpedal through this camera. So they go on and they see Lisa, and Lisa is to be talking to some random guy. And immediately we have the detective that's asking Will, it's like, well, hey, do you know this guy? And Will's like, no, like, I don't know much about Lisa's past. Like, I don't know anything of, like, her being in high school or anything like that. I don't know any of her friends. And so detective's like, okay, this is strange. So we go on, we have this truck that's in the way, we can't see what's going on, and then Lisa is gone with this man in his car. So we have the detective that takes Will into this interrogation room and is starting to rattle off all these questions for Will, asking about Lisa's like past, about her friends, about her affair. And so we have it to where Will is asking all these questions or answering all these questions, but he is like, why are you asking me any of this crap? Like, this is just like, this is a waste to be asking me any of this. Like, I'm not the guy who is to have abducted my own wife. And, like, all you're doing here is just kind of going on and wasting time when you should be going after this guy, because my wife could be like 3 states away by now, and like you're going on and questioning me thinking that I'm the guy who is to go on and take my own wife. And like the whole real thought about it is, why would Will go on and come up with the evidence of this guy stealing his wife away? Why would he want to go on and give him the evidence of this? Would he be that stupid to just like, hey man, like I really wanted to get caught. Here's this video of somebody abducting my wife that I knew who this guy was. Like, isn't that dumb to have gone on and just like given up evidence to corroborate or to like to say that like, oh yeah, I wanted to get caught now. It really is to have gone on and have me go like, man, that is kind of stupid. So we have the detective that is possibly thinking that Will may be a guilty guy. Um, but he's like, well, like we don't have anything on him, so let's just kind of let him go. So we go on and we have, of course, Will, who is to make it to Lisa's parents' house again, like asking, like, hey, do you guys know anything different? Like, did you call anybody? So Barry, who is, of course, Lisa's father, is to say, like, well, like, it seems like there's an APB out for Lisa, and, like, we're trying to figure things out. So, Will is to go on and take a picture of the guy that had possibly abducted Lisa. So, Will is giving the picture of this guy to uh, these parents, and they're like, well, hey, like that seems like the guy that would go on and do like some work at our house, and that guy's name is Knuckles. And Will is like, are you sure about that? And like they're like, well, like it's not the best picture. I'm like, well, of course it's not, because it's freaking like Bigfoot. If you want to go on and have like the perfect picture of a certain it won't work. So they're going on and they're thinking like, well, like I think that this is a guy named Knuckles. Like it looks like this guy, clearly. And so then Will's like, okay, well, do you guys know where he lives? Like, it's obviously you guys can depict the car much more so than the man. So Will goes off to this location to speak with Knuckles, and before he goes on and does that, he calls the detective, telling him that he's just kind of driving around, like driving in circles. He doesn't know where he's going. He's just trying to find his wife. And so Will is to tell the detective, it's like, well, hey, like, I know what you were trying to do. Like, you're just trying to do your job. And, like, I appreciate what you're doing. And yada, yada, yada. So the detective's like, okay, well, hey, if you get any other information. And so Will's like, all right, like, I'll go on and tell you. So you'll be the first one to know. Not really. So Will makes his way to Knuckles' trailer and is to have this just kind of pipe iron or just kind of uh, this thing that you would normally go on and uh, do, like if you had a flat and you would have this little tool of sorts. So tire iron, yeah, that's probably what it's called. Duh. Anyways, so Will is to have this tire iron and is to come into this house and start scaring Knuckles and start beating the crap out of him. And so Will is telling like Knuckles like, "Hey, where's my wife? Where is she?" And so we have it to where Knuckles continues to get like flung all over the house, beating the crap out of, and so Will at some point is to have Knuckles finally confess that she's with a guy named Frank. And Will's like, oh, okay. So Will goes into Knuckles' house and is to find some duct tape and is to find a gun there and probably is to find a stick of gum. Who knows? Anyways, so Will goes on to then duct tape Knuckles and then puts him in the back, the trunk part of his car. So Will then goes on and is starting to drive and is like trying to speed his way to quickly make it to where Frank's place is. Even though Knuckles, I don't think like he might have, yeah, I think he might have gone on and gave some kind of address for where Frank is. So Will is speeding, and all of a sudden we have this police officer that pulls Will over. And so, let me pause here for a second. All right. So, Will ends up getting pulled over. And so we have this detective, or this officer, and this kind of just officer gear is going on and looking through Will's car, and it seems that at first this is just gonna be a quick speeding ticket, but instead this guy is like, well, hey, how about you get out of your car? And Will is just like, well, like, aren't you just gonna give me a speeding ticket? And the officer's like, nope. So eventually, it seems that this officer is to ask this guy about uh, some of his wife's luggage being in the back seat, and then eventually, like, this officer is to want the trunk opened. So Will is to be forced to open this trunk, but then he is to run off into the forest and have the cop kind of fire some shots. So the officer is to see that there, of course, is to be a guy in the trunk duct taped, and so Will is to then run off to go on and try and find a guy that, of course, is to be tied to Frank. So we go on and we have Will who's talking to some guy in the middle of nowhere in this forest that is tied to Frank. So Frank is going on and talking to this guy and saying like, "Well, hey, like I'm I'm looking I'm looking for Frank. Like Knuckles was to like turn me on to a guy named Frank, and so like now I want to go on and meet this Frank guy." And they're like, "Oh, okay, well." We have it to where like this guy is asking Will, it's like, "Hey, where's your car?" Like, and Will's like, "Well, like I broke down like X number of miles ago," and so Will's getting more antsy, and he's just like, "Come on, like let's go, like you're taking way too much of my time, like." Hey man, like if I'm not gonna be able to see Frank right now, then Frank's gonna get ticked, but like I'm just gonna walk off. And so all of a sudden the guy is telling Will, like, "No, what, how about you go on and just make your way down there?" And so Will's like, "Okay, great. Like I'll see you later." So Will makes his way to this kind of this meth labbed kind of barn slash place that everybody's living with a bunch of these trailers and like just kind of random uh, kind of area of sorts that is to obviously be some meth lab. So Will goes on and it starts to eventually kind of thumb through this place to see a guy weirdly in his underwear, and he's just walking around in his underwear as if this is Breaking Bad for some odd reason. So we have Will that eventually stumbles upon a guy who's kind of sleeping in his car, and Will has to kind of beat him up and knock him unconscious, and then he ends up taking his gun from him. So Will continues to just kind of thumb his way through all of these places and starts trying to figure out whether or not he can find a place that could possibly have Lisa like being held captive there. So Will finally makes it to this one spot where there's a number of guys talking, and after he is to go and knock out this one guy that's having this apron on. So Will is to finally see a number of guys and finally talk to them and want this certain like container opened, and they end up opening it and there's nothing in there. So eventually these two guys try to fire their guns upon Will, and eventually Will shoots and takes one of them down, but then is to turn around and try to find this other guy and kill him, which eventually he does. Will then is to, after getting to that spot, he starts to pull guns on people, telling them to go away, and so eventually Will bumps back into Oscar, who is to be in this compound also, and so Oscar is to give Will Lisa's phone and is to tell him that, hey, like, I know where Lisa is, like, give me $20,000. And Will's like, yeah, I'll give you the money. And Oscar's like, well, like, how am I supposed to know you're going to really legitimately give me this money? And he's like, well, I'm going to go to the bank and I'll give them to you. And the guy's like, that doesn't, no, that's not good enough. And Will's like, well, how am I supposed to give you the money? So all of a sudden we have it to where this meth lab is to explode, and Oscar, who of course to have this supposedly like answer for Will of where Lisa is, now we find Oscar dead. So we have Detective Peterson that is now with Knuckles, and the detective is now torturing this guy, wanting to know where this girl is, and choking him. So we have Knuckles who's telling the detective that this girl is dead, that he had dug a hole for her and put the body in, and she's dead. So the detective is like, oh my god, like, this girl is dead. Like, Will's just gonna be so upset when eventually he realizes that his wife is dead, yada yada yada. So Will is to go on and look all over the place for his wife in this compound, and he can't find her. So it seems that the detective is to finally make it to this compound, and is to eventually have a number of police officers and so on and so forth, because we have it where Knuckles is to give up the location of where Frank is. So we have the detective who is seeing Will. It's like, oh, you were just driving around in circles, huh? Like, it seems like you were like knowing everything what's going on before I did. So Will finally goes on and is to just assigned to, like, instead of staying put like the detective wanted, the detective tries to go on and is to look into this spot where there could be possibly a hole digged, and he ends up kind of uncovering it, and he finds nothing there, as if he's looking for Jimmy Hoffa. So Will continues to look throughout this compound and eventually finds this little shed that is to have somebody going inside of it. So Will is to open this place up and is to realize that Lisa's there. She's all tied up. So he grabs her and just kind of undoes her little gag and so on and so forth. So we go on, and Will is to find Lisa, and we have this couple that is to go on and live happily ever after, because the detective is to meet up with Will and say, like, well, hey, like, it seems that when we were to go on and expect further into that whole meth lab thing, it seems like there were shots fired and people killed, but you wouldn't know anything about that now, would you? And Will's like, oh no, I wouldn't know anything about that. Like, yeah, I thought you wouldn't, because and it seemed that Knuckles was to easily want to confess everything, and was to, of course, like, uh, go on and have it to where, like, Knuckles didn't want to press charges against Will for the whole kidnapping thing or whatever. So, like, Will is to have gone, like, scot-free, and so Will, of course, is to eventually just go back with Lisa, and I think things are perfectly fine now. I'm assuming it didn't really have it be that Lisa's like, you know what? Like, after my life was on the line, like, I finally just want a divorce from you, Will. Like, no, you would think after this time, after Will went out of his way to risk his neck for Lisa, you would have thought, like, finally now we probably have Lisa that's like, you know what? Like, I was wrong before. Like, Will, you're my man. Because you freaking risked your life to come and get me. And so, yeah. So, Lisa better hold on to that man. Uh, Definitely. Um, Instead of going on and having an affair with Clint and so on and so forth. Even at one point, Lisa is to be talking to her mother about, like, what she wants to do, and, like, the whole affair and what happened with Will and Clint and all these things. And so, but eventually, yeah, like, the happy end. I guess there's a happy ending out of all this, And so with that said, I think I'm just going to get out of here. There might have been like random scenes here and there that I didn't go into because I don't feel like there was like much really there. Like I can go on and like mention that the detective was to go on and meet up with Lisa's parents, and the detective was to go on and take the information that Lisa's parents were to give him and were to try to search for Knuckles, and like he came up with nothing. There was nothing at this. There was nothing at this trailer. But then eventually, when like the cops were to find Knuckles, and then the detective was to be questioning Knuckles, that eventually led to the detective going and finding where Frank was in the location. So, and of course, Frank was of course to be killed as well as with a guy named Larry. So yeah, I think that technically covers everything. Let me know in the comments below if there's any little detail that I forgot about. There's a bunch of kind of rando scenes that like really like don't deliver much as far as like much more context to probably this movie. So if anything, I probably forgot about, it probably was something that wasn't really all that valuable if I were to have forgotten it. So with that said, I'm gonna go out of my way to just say I'm gonna get out of here. Let me know in the comments below about this movie, how you felt about it. If you went on and spent the $20 to see this movie, and then you're just like, oh, okay, well this is another Gerard Butler movie. Because I think a lot of people are to see Gerard Butler, and they're like, well, I'm gonna watch his movies regardless because a lot of them are pretty good. This one was just kind of very flat and just very just like okay. It was just like, hey, like this was a good waste of an hour and a half. But anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.